Welcome back to The Shepherd's Pie, a slice of faith for our messy lives. I'm Tony Kolenc, a professor at Ave Maria School of Law and the father of 5 grown children and author of inspirational fiction for teens and adults. On that note, I've been real excited this year as I'm finishing up the Harwood Mysteries medieval historical fiction series from Loyola Press. We are just getting to the point now where we're working on covers and maps for book 6. So real excited about that. I hope to have a cover reveal coming out sometime in the next month or two. But today I am speaking with Sue A. Fairchild about the topic of faith and grieving. My guest today is Sue A. Fairchild. She started out as a devotion writer, but she now also claims the titles of novel writer, editor, writing coach, and speaker. She's actually written 3 books, and her latest novel, Changing Tides, was just released this year from Elk Lake Publishing. She's working on a follow-up book to that, Changing Seasons, which will come out later in 2024. But when Sue isn't writing her own stories, she loves working with other Christian authors in their own writing journey. And she and her husband live in north central Pennsylvania. Sue, welcome to the Shepherd's Pie.
Hi, nice to be here.
So I always like to kind of let our guests talk just a little bit about their backgrounds. And I'm always interested in how people get involved in writing and publishing novels. So maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Actually, I started out as a graphic designer. My degree is a Bachelor of Arts in Graphic Design. I did that for several years. Then 9/11 kind of happened and the world changed. So I got out of that industry and actually became an insurance agent. I always loved grammar and English, and that was, English was my favorite topic in school, but never really thought about writing professionally or didn't really write stories. But I started going to a local church, and something I said during a Sunday school kind of interaction, one of the women said, that would make a really good devotion. And I said, great, what is a devotion? I just had no idea. So she said, well, you come to my writers group and I'll show you and I'll teach you how to do it. So I did, and she did, and I'm still part of that writers group today. And the very first devotion that I wrote was published, and kind of got hooked after that. I really like to immerse myself in things. So I immersed myself in the writing industry, and I'm kind of meticulous. And so soon my writers group said, you'd be a really good editor. So I've kind of just been spurred along by these folks in my writers group, really. So I decided to do some editing. So just chose to branch out on my own. Thankfully, my husband has a really great job because writing does not pay a lot. Writing and editing do not pay a lot. That was 10 years ago. It's been going well.
That's exciting. But writing groups, yeah, my experience is similar that, anything that I've ever done good in fiction writing has been because I joined a writers group. In my case, it was the Catholic Writers Guild. And they're the reasons I got, book contracts and networking and all that. So I think anybody who's an aspiring writer needs to be looking at a Christian writers group. I know we're going to talk about Changing Tides here in a second, but what are your other 2 prior writings before Changing Tides?
So I self-published 2 other novels, more not because that I had these stories kind of to tell. They kind of came about organically. I had a lot of clients come to me to ask, how do you self-publish? How does that happen? And I didn't really know. So I wanted to figure that out myself. So I wrote a novel. It's a YA novel, loosely based on my own young adulthood and my relationship with my best friend, whom I'm still friends with today. I wrote another woman's contemporary. It's a novella. It's shorter. That started out as like flash fiction on my blog. I was writing flash fiction every Friday on my blog, trying to figure out how to write flash fiction. I didn't do that very well because it turned into a novella. It's not a flash fiction thing because it became kind of an ongoing serial. So I took all of that and put it together into a novel. So those are my first 2 self-published. That's been, I think they were 2015, 2016. I think I published those.
All right, and now you've got your latest one, Changing Tides, and it sounds like there's a lot of deep kind of topics you deal with there. So maybe tell us a little bit about Changing Tides and what that's about.
Changing Tides came about really from a conversation I had been having with my husband. Kind of, we joke around a little bit. His family is known for really longevity, they live very long, and my family is not. So we often had this conversation about, okay, if I go first, what will you do? Will you get remarried? I think a lot of husbands and wives have these conversations. And he always said, no, I'll be a hermit. I don't want to marry anyone else. I don't want to go through the dating process again. I don't want to do any of that again. I'm just going to like live by myself. And so I kind of took that idea and it was germinating. And I thought, okay, what if I wrote this story out and tried to figure out what may he do if I were to unfortunately pass at an early age? What's like fantastical. And it was during National Novel Writing Month in November. I was challenging myself to write this 50,000 word novel. And this is what came about. That was the story that started it. And really throughout it all, as I wrote, I really think God wanted me to write this story, not only to just possibly help other people with grief in this way, but also I really got to know my husband a lot better while writing the story, because I would ask him, like, what would you do in this situation? Or what kind of things would you keep? Would you get rid of all my stuff? Would you keep my stuff? It was kind of research for the book, but I got to know him a little bit better as I wrote.
I mean, he's your protagonist, basically your husband. Did you base the character in all on your husband?
Oh, it is definitely based on my husband. The male protagonist is pretty close to my husband. He often says he would like to be alone, but he really is kind of a people person. He likes being with people, and that's kind of how this main character figures out part of his life after his wife passes away. And also, the main character in this book has a dog, Daisy. She is completely modeled after our dog, Daisy.
As a writer who would be afraid of writing my wife as a main protagonist, or at least telling her that I did so, just I'm curious, how did that work out? When when you're basing a character on your husband, I could see there could be potential interesting conversations you might have. Is he happy with your protagonist?
He hasn't actually read the whole thing yet, so I can't really answer that. I think he was intrigued about it. I think that through the process, he kind of joked around about it a lot and said that I had some kind of maybe sick fascination with the fact that I might die before he does. But yeah, it did lead to a lot of good conversation. I think for sure it brought us closer together. I think to some extent he felt a little honored that I was using him, basing this on him. I really wanted to figure out, I really wanted to know more about how a male deals with grief and loss, because as a female, we deal a certain way, but men often deal much differently. They do kind of a lot of times cut people off and just kind of go inward, where women, I think, tend to want to surround themselves with other women to talk it out and talk it through. And my husband is definitely that way. He doesn't want to talk anything through. So I had to ask him, how do you process things if you don't talk to your friends, or how would this character work all this out? So it definitely led to interesting conversations.
Now, I guess I'll plug a podcast of some friends of mine. Jennifer Thomas and Andrea Bear have a podcast called Morning Glory, morning being Mourning, and they pretty much interview people and talk about grief. And I was actually interviewed on there not that long ago talking about an adoption situation, because there's all, like you mentioned, all kinds of grief out there. But I'm curious, why did you decide to kind of write a book where it's a widower's grief, and you're writing from a man's perspective, where you've had to sort of do research on your husband? Is that an area that you just think isn't well enough plowed in the literature out there?
I think that's part of it. Like I said, I kind of started based on our conversations, and I knew that I probably will not be the widow in our scenario. So it would have to be from his perspective. I will say that when I started talking to a few agents about the book, I was really kind of directed to make sure I had a female protagonist as well. Some tried to convince me that I should change it to a female. I don't think that it's something that is male protagonists are often not used, especially in a contemporary Christian genre. A lot of times they're more in like suspense or murder mystery. They're the protagonists. a lot of people that I talked to, readers, potential readers, were really intrigued and couldn't wait to read this because kind of the same thing. They want to know how their spouse's grief or interact, or it seemed like it would be fresh to them. Not to kind of toot my own horn, that was just how God led me to write it. But I think it is kind of an unserved part of the contemporary Christian, especially genre. I think that's because maybe some agents and publishers think that, well, that men aren't reading this genre, but women still want to read that. They want to still read different perspectives. So I think it works.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like it's entirely focused on the grieving process. Now, is this something that also you were able to draw from any of your own experiences in life?
I guess the answer to that is yes. I didn't really know that going in. You know how when you immerse yourself in something or you start writing something when you're a writer, things will then be highlighted for you. So I noticed that at my church, we have a lot of widows and widowers. There's a lot of people that have lost their spouses. My father has lost his wife. My mom died in 2019, and I wrote this right after that. So I was drawing a little bit from that about how he was interacting with people, how our relationship was. So, yeah, I don't know if I intentionally started to think even really about grief or to write about grief. It wasn't until later when I started writing the next book that I realized, oh, grief is kind of a theme in my writing. And I think that just comes from kind of being someone who wants to connect to people and understand people. I've said previously that I should have really been like a psychology major. I should have gone into psychology because I really like to know how people tick and think and how they interact and why does someone react a different way than I react. I really like kind of figuring all that out. And I mean, writing's a great avenue for that, right? To kind of figure out all these different characters.
Now, you've mentioned that this is in the genre of Christian contemporary fiction. So it sounds to me like you have a faith element in the book. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So Gabe, the main character, the widower, he, as many people do, him and his wife had a church family. They were faithful churchgoers and they had connection with God, but often when loss hits, sometimes that connection with God, gets ripped apart a little bit. So that's where he's at. He is unsure how to talk with God anymore because he's kind of angry, he's upset. He is not following what God wants him to do. He's kind of gone off on his own to like live at the beach, uproot his life, go away from all of his friends and family, and just be by himself. But as God does, I think, he comes to work for this person who is a very firm Christian, who is very rooted in his faith and who wants Gabe to get back to that. He realizes in this new friend, that's what's missing. You're missing God in your life. You're trying to do everything your own way. And so this new person in his life, and then he has several people who are trying to kind of steer him back to the Lord and help him. And kind of along the way, he's seeing, kind of like I did at church while I was writing, how all of these other people are suffering grief too. He's not the only one. We often think it's just me. No one else has ever felt this. But of course, we know people have. People have lost people. I mean, it's every day people lose folks. So yeah, I think I just tried to make it's not beat over your head with Christianity for sure, because I just don't think that that is real life. I think that we just try and, especially in the Christian community, it's been my experience, we kind of gently try to nudge each other when we're walking kind of down the wrong path or kind of getting away from that relationship with God.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we all experience grief, and it sounds like most writers I know, if you're going to write a book where grief is going to be part of it, you're doing your research, and it sounds like you've done some of that research through people you know at church, through discussions with your husband. So, what would you say maybe are some of the lessons that you've taken away after kind of thinking about these things, writing about them when it comes to faith and grieving? Because it strikes me that your protagonist has a pretty common human reaction to loss, which might be to pull away from God, as some of us might do. So, what are some of the things that you think you might have taken away about grief and faith?
I think definitely that your faith community is very important. You need to stay close to them as much as you're trying to stay close to God, because The faith community is who will help steer you back onto a right path, or who will hopefully try and help you make sense of things when you're dealing with grief and all of those emotions come. Sometimes we're not remembering to read our Bible or pray or draw on scripture. And that faith community can really help you with that and gently and lovingly point out where you've gone astray. Or even I've had friends when I was going through loss of my mom. She was in hospice for 3 months. And I mean, people just prayed over me. And I was kind of where Gabe is in this book. I was angry. My mom had suffered really long time with an illness, and it was her time to go. So I was ready for that. And I knew where she would go. So I just wanted her to be healed again. I just wanted, it was 3 long months towards the end that was just torturous for all of us. So I didn't have a great relationship with God during that time, but I had friends who held me up. I often talk about, and I've talked about previously, the story of Moses with Aaron and Hur holding his arms up. Like, friends hold us up when we don't have the strength to do that anymore. And that's what my friends did during that time. They prayed for me. They brought us food, my father and I food. They cared for us. And that is what a faith community does. That's how we all work together. And that's why the Bible says to stay in community with each other.
So it does sound like and you said you wrote this not long after you went through that. So I can only imagine you were drawing from a wellspring of your
Yeah.
own grief. I know a lot of people who might be listening, might be in that place where you were, with your mom when she was still with you. What was your experience of pulling away from God during that time? And then what did your friends do to sort of bring you back to where you needed to be?
I think that my friends at the time just kind of tried to keep me grounded. Like I said, it was a time when I really felt like it was her time. So often when you lose someone, you don't think this is their time or you really want them to stay longer. But my mom had suffered for so long. She had a COPD, really advanced stages, for 30 years. And she was really like struggling. And she had decided like this was it. This was the time for her. She knew her life was done. And I wanted to honor that. But there's nothing we can do. This weird thing, because normally when people are dying, you don't want them to die and you don't want them to. But I just wanted her to be healed again. I knew when was gone, she would be with God and healed, and all of this struggle would be done for her. And so I was just angry with him that it was taking so long and bringing kind of my dad and I down with it, because she did in-home hospice. So that was my dad taking care of her 24/7. And he's not necessarily that healthy of a person. So it was just taking all of us down. We were very tired and very run down. And that is when the enemy can kind of get in. I didn't have time to really read my Bible like I should during that time, because I would get up and go to their house and help all day and try and still do my work and take care of my own husband and my own house. And it was very busy time, and very, like, at the end of the day, you're just exhausted. Those are the times when life and the enemy can kind of dig in there because we're weak. And he did. And my friends helped in that, and my faith community helped in that. Like I said, food, asking what I needed, trying to provide sounding boards, praying over me. Our church choir came and sang to my mom one day at her bedside. That just meant so much to us. My husband was going through a doctorate program at the time, and he was done and he was graduating. So we had to go away to another state to kind of do his graduation. People came to help my dad during that time, because I said, I can't go. I can't leave him alone. But my church family said, no, we'll come and help. You go do that. All of those things just meant so much, to have some semblance of normal life, and just to know that people cared so much, not only for me, but for her and for dad, to just make sure that everything was as normal as possible. And then since then, I've had time apart from it and time apart from that grief, and now can see, okay, God's time is always right. It's never wrong. Those 3 months helped my dad to cope with loss. I was ready. She was ready. He was not. So time and distance helps with that. But, friends helped us see all that too. Yeah.
I could see where you would really pull the theme of plugging into your community for your book based on what you were just describing there. Can I ask maybe also, did you get any inspiration for how your protagonist handled grief from the way your dad was going through grief during that time?
I think for sure that my dad pulled away a little bit after she died, and now since then he has like also immersed himself in our church. So he's been much more active, and that was not really who he was prior to her death. His life was taking care of her and caring for her. And often that's another way the church family can help, really, because often when you have someone who's a caregiver for another spouse and they pass away, they don't know what to do with themselves anymore. I think my dad went through a period of that. I think my protagonist goes through a period of that. He doesn't really know what to do anymore. His goal was to just make his wife happy and to just care for her, and now that's gone. So yeah, I think I drew some of that from my father, because Gabe in the book does deal with that. He's feeling a little guilty about, did I give her the life she needed to have in these short span of time? And dad had a longer time with my mom, but did he give her the life she needed to have or she should have had? So yeah, I think I maybe subconsciously did that.
The other thing is, as you were discussing, just the suffering that you and your mom were kind of going through, and your whole family, I guess, during those 3 months. Of course, we know as Christians, God uses our suffering for good, but it's easy to say that when you're not going through it. Now that you've had a few years to reflect back on the suffering, either your mom or your family went through, do you see any good that God brought from your suffering, or how your suffering was used in a way that, to be joined with the suffering of Christ?
My dad and I were always kind of connected because of dealing with my mom and her longtime illness. So we were both people who took care of her. And so we were connected in that way. But I think that going through this hospice experience, this caregiving experience, where each of us had to do things that, I mean, I'm not meant to be a nurse at all. So, and neither is he. But going through that together, it was kind of like, okay, now we've had this experience too, and we've had all these years previous where there was some grief involved in her previous years of life too. So we've had a really strong relationship since then, and I think that that's part of the grief that we went through. That made us even stronger relationship.
Yeah, it does seem like going through, I've had that experience in my own life, going through that. There's a certain bonding that occurs when you suffer together that would no other way be able to happen. And so I've know what you're saying on that. All right. So the final question, if anybody in, right now is listening to this and they're sort of in a place of grief, especially if they're not sure, when you go through that time when you don't know how to get through a day or whatever, do you have any words of advice for them just based on your own experiences?
I think I would say, obviously, try and take time to pray and get quiet with God. But if you are going through that kind of emotion where you're not really happy with him right now, or you can't talk to him, then find some other friend, some other like touchstone, someone who is not going through their own personal grief and can give you some clarity. Find someone in your church, whether that be a pastor or a really good friend or a counselor, a Christian counselor. Don't go inward and just deal with it yourself, because that is definitely not going to help. You're just going to continue to spiral. If I hadn't had these other people in my life, and really if I hadn't had my father who was going through it at the same time, we were kind of holding each other up too. But if I hadn't had my church family, I mean, I think it would have been a lot worse. If I didn't have my faith, it would have been a lot worse. So definitely, if you can't talk to God, or you're just kind of angry, or just you need someone to actually hear and hug you and care for you, then try and find someone. Reach out. I didn't want to reach out at first. I was like, we're just this a family thing. We're going through it. But when I reached out, that was when I had so many people surround me and help.
Wonderful advice. All right. So if folks are interested in reading Changing Tides, learning more about you and your other writing, where would you like them to go?
Well, definitely, if they want to check out Changing Tides, it's on Amazon. There are other books titled Changing Tides, so just you can use my last name along with that search and you find it easily. I'm most active on Instagram, Sue Fairchild Edits, and then my website is suefairchild.wordpress.com, which I have blog articles on there. I have editing things. If you're a writer and you want some advice, I have a newsletter, but you can get all that through the website.
And I suppose if you're a writer and you are looking for an editor, they can also find out how to submit something to you for that on your website also.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Sue, this has really been a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing all that with us, not just about your writing, but about your own faith and experience with grief. So thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for the show today. We've been speaking with Sue A. Fairchild about faith and grieving. And again, this is Antony Barone Kolenc. If you want to learn more about me or any of my writings or my release of book 6, definitely check out my website, antonykolenc.com. Until next time, may God bless us as we rely on our faith to work through the messy challenges of our lives.